Hi, my name is Nicholas Broughton and I'm a Randomfish. Hit the subscribe button and let's all be random fishes together, shall we? So people, do we like classical music? No? Well, that's kind of depressing. Because classical music has actually not only influenced a lot of movies over the years, but it's kind of the inspiration behind a lot of current music being used in movies. And I say this with absolutely no degree of sarcasm. As someone who was raised on classical music, I very much was indoctrinated into that world, and I was given this sort of this belief and this power within classical music. Also as a child, I was subjected to a lot of cartoons, a lot of films and whatnot that involved a lot of classical music in it, as well as unconventional ways of telling a story through using classical music as well as, say, either puppetry or animation. And one of those things, rather amusingly, although I never watched the entire thing, was called Oscar's Orchestra. Yeah, Oscar's Orchestra. A show that very much began in '95 and ended in '96. 3 seasons it lasted. Quite how that ran from '95 to '96 for 3 seasons, I have absolutely no idea, but hey, my timing could be completely off. But at the same time, Oscar's Orchestra was very much a pantheon of classical music puns, of interesting stories, and actually some very cool ideas. I'm not saying it was overly deep or anything. I mean, it was a kids show. Kids shows, for the most part, a lot of the times in the 90s, if I'm going to be completely honest, weren't overly complex because they didn't think the kids could handle it. But it was definitely cool to see. And while there's another show I want to talk about the next time, I kind of wanted to focus on this one because I don't see many people talking about Oscar's Orchestra. At least, not in the way that they actually find a way of enjoying the show. To look at it completely objectively is kind of easy for me, because honestly, while I was raised on classical music, I wasn't as addicted to the shows as maybe I could have been as a child. But Oscar's Orchestra is set in the far distant future. And when I say the far distant future, I mean it's around the year, let me just double check this. Yes, 2743. Yep, that's correct, 2743. And in this future, the evil dictator of the world has banned music. Yeah, not quite sure how that worked. I feel like this is very similar to the story of We Will Rock You all of a sudden, but you know, less about that the better. But the guy who now rules the world has banned music to ever, and he's called Thaddeus Vent. He has a little soft teddy that he keeps on him at all times and he talks to, and he also uses the teddy as excuses for why he wants to try out plans, which is very interesting. He has a henchman called Lucius, who has green skin, very little hair, and talks very much like this. And I'm here to do this. Creepy. He's creepy. That's what he is. But Lucius also has his own little pet, if you will, a savage called Tank, who's basically looks like a weird combination of a lump of clay that got brought to life and given super strength for some weird reason. Tank's really only lines throughout it is to laugh goofily and then to say the last thing that Lucius said. So, for example, when Lucius is about to attack someone, he goes, "Fire, Tank," and Tank goes, "Fire," and then fires a laser. This was made in the '95, in a year where, quite frankly, the future was either going to be dystopian or completely idealized with a dark underbelly. You know, if anime's taught me anything, it's that at certain point in time, we all just believe the future is going to be awful. In some way, shape or form. We are introduced then to our main protagonists. Bear in mind, these guys are the antagonists. Oh! I also got about one other guy. I don't know why. Thaddeus is a soothsayer. called Goldtooth. And every time he announces himself, he scares the bejesus out of Thaddeus. Every time. Thaddeus could be sitting there making a dramatic monologue or doing something of the like, and Goldtooth's right behind him. It is I, Goldberg, Goldtooth, the soothsayer. Goldberg? No, wrong show. It is I, Goldtooth, the soothsayer. Scares him every time. Genius. But those guys are the antagonists of the show, and they're hilarious every single time. But we're now going to move on to the protagonists. That being the likes of Oscar and his orchestra. Oscar is a talking piano. Instruments talk in this world. It's a thing. But of course, throughout all of that, Oscar and his orchestra all talk. And Oscar is currently on the run from Thaddeus because he used to belong to Thaddeus. And also, it's kind of the reason as to why Thaddeus banned music in the first place, because he was really bad at playing piano and he didn't want to learn how to play a piece by the composer Chopin. And so he tried to convince Oscar to play it for him at a recital. Basically, because he knew Oscar was able to was alive and everything else. So Oscar starts playing himself. And starts playing the piece himself, on the keys, and the entire world suddenly realizes that he can talk and that, Thaddeus was a fraud. And so he got really upset, and like any good villain from the 90s, or any good villain at all, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, the 90s should have nothing to do with it. He banned music because he was embarrassed and he was humiliated by someone else because he was revealed to be a cheater. Classic, I have to say. Really, isn't that always just the way you get humiliated, and so you ban the thing that got you humiliated? What? Forget it. Trying to understand Thaddeus Vent is a little bit like trying to understand Animal from the Muppets. It just doesn't exist. You can't do it. But here we go. Oscar's orchestra consists of a whole bunch of various other characters, up to and including the likes of Monty the Violin, who sounds like a 1940s style general from Britain. Bear in mind, this is a British-made show, but he's varied. He's over the top, yes, what? I expect him to constantly be saying what after every sentence. It's weird. It's hilarious, don't get me wrong, but weird. You also have Eric the Triangle. I'll explain about what he can do a little bit later on, because frankly, that's kind of funny. Or just brilliant, I think. You have Trevor the tuba, I should say. Yes. You also have Sylvia the flute, Louis the oboe, and Stan and Crash, these two cymbals. You also have a character that's very unique to the show, and kind of unique in general, I have to say, especially for the time period. A character called Kevin the Keyboard. Now, he was created by a kid who won a contest with Blue Peter, and the character was actually written into the show. Now, I know a lot of the time these days, the kids being involved in the shows and the want of various shows and programs to want to try and get the viewers involved is all well and good. But back then, that was kind of, it was rare to see something brought into true focus of that caliber. Especially to see a character that was created by a kid that would not only have been taken seriously by the makers of the show, but also put into the show. I have to say, very cool, very interesting to see. I want to go back to Eric the Triangle now, because, frankly, this all goes back to a little interesting thing that was put out years ago. Kids, for many of you, anyway, you might have had discussions about the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle was said to be a mysterious place where things happened. Now, obviously, it is also this thing where people still say people go into the Bermuda Triangle, but they never come out. Ooh, what happens? And this, of course, created a whole bunch of theories, up to and including a magnetized field that was somehow been created around it, to disable any technology. That means that's why planes could never go through there, or why boats could never go through there, and they were never seen again because they got, their technology was destroyed and they just either crashed or whatever. Another theory that people had at one point was that it was, in fact, a specific mystical place where you'd go into and you could open places to anywhere in the world. This kind of got carried out into Oscar's Orchestra, which I have to say is very cool as an idea. I'm saying very cool a lot for this, I have to say. I'm saying very cool a lot recently, I do apologize. But Eric the Triangle has this ability that if he touches his nose to his feet, bear in mind he is a triangle, and he's sort of shaped like an L. His eyes are up here with a little backwards baseball cap, and, he comes down and he bounces like this. But if he touches his nose to his feet, like so, he creates a time and space portal. I'm not even kidding. I mean, the ideas of what you could have done with the show and you pull off that is very interesting. I also love the fact that he's referred to as a Bermuda Triangle, not the Bermuda Triangle, which means that many of them across the world, there's a whole bunch of ways that you could transport yourself through time and space with absolutely no issue, and it's actually kind of hilarious. Then we come over to the other two characters in the show. Two characters who are very interesting. They're the only humans we really see a lot of in the show. A girl called Rebecca and her father, Mr. Crotchet. Let's just double check that, just to make sure. Yes, Mr. Crotchet. As in a crotchet, the note. Singular note. Boom, crotchet. Hilarious. This show is filled with those sorts of puns. It's brilliant. It's brilliant for a classical music fan. It really is, especially when you're a kid. It's, as an adult, slightly less funny, but when you're younger, it's more funny. Anyway. But Rebecca and Mr. Crotchet own a diner at the beginning of the show, and Mr. Crotchet is... He's an ally to Oscar, but he's not very open about it, because obviously anyone who displays any allying, and he wants to be allied with Oscar or the other members of his orchestra, including Monty or Eric or Trevor or Sylvia or whoever, they get locked up. And Thaddeus doesn't want people liking Oscar because he wants everyone to like him. He's kind of, how do I put this? He's the human version of King John from the Disney Robin Hood film. Apart from the sucking of his thumb, it actually is the same flipping character. But Crotchet is, obviously he's Rebecca's grandfather, not her father. And the interesting thing about them is that Rebecca sounds, I hate using the term normal, but sounds, has no real distinguished accent, I guess, distinguishable accent. She very much just talks like a kid talks, and that's fine. Her grandfather, on the other hand, has a very, very thick, almost, I want to say Venetian accent. Very much, he very much likes to talk. He talks slightly Italian, not quite over the top Italian, but an interesting old man-y style Italian. And I'm kind of amused as to what the story is, because I don't really see how Rebecca's 10 in the show, and I know this is the whole voice actors and kid actors and blah blah blah, and you can't always get the accents compatible, and I think in the 90s there was less of a caring of these things to have happened. But I'm looking at it now as a microscope, as a 30-year-old man, and I'm looking at it going, what happened between him and Rebecca? What happened with her parents that caused her to lose the accent? Also, the whole thing is set in New Vienna. Yes, it looks like a traditional futuristic city, but it's called New Vienna. which it states, to me anyway, that I'm guessing the whole place is set in Italy, which would make a lot of sense. But the thing that amuses me is that if Rebecca's parents had left the country and she was living with her granddad out of a case of maybe convenience, I'm not sure. But again, her parents are very rarely mentioned, if at all, and they don't really have... If they had suffered like so many parents suffered in the 90s from the missing parentitis that a lot of shows seem to pick up on, and I'm not just talking about Disney, I'm talking about the whole shebang of kids shows. Because for some reason, Disney seems to like to continue this thing of dead or dying parents, and for some reason the old shows sort of stopped doing that in the 90s. Progress, I guess, but here's the thing. If her parents really had gone, and she was living with her grandfather, and even if she had had only just like a year or something of living with him, I mean, not an overly impressionable child, but I would have thought a child of any length really would have at least picked up a small hint of an accent. I mean, again, I might be reading a bit too much into this, but consistency. That's all I'm saying. Consistency, people. But then again, what the hell do I know? Rebecca is still a strong character. She still does amazing things. And like I said, so many puns in this show. Like, so many puns. I mean, you know, for example, they have an episode called Bark to the Future. That's Bark spelled B-A-C-H. Yeah. I look at these now and I don't laugh, I groan. But then again, I suppose that's what happens when you're subjected to so many classical puns over the course of your life by your family. And I'm not sure anymore, but Oscar's Orchestra, some of the episodes are available on YouTube, so do please check them out if you can. It's incredibly cool to look at, and honestly, if nothing else, I don't know if there was a DVD release of it. I know there was VHS releases of it, because I used to have a VHS tape of it, of a few episodes actually. But I wasn't... I've never owned the full 3 seasons of the show, I'm afraid. And while I'm trying to find them, I have to say it's very cool to look at it. It's very cool to remind myself of what the show is and what it was. And I remember watching it a few times as a kid. I don't remember having watched the whole run of the show. I just remember it being a very unique and interesting show that I just remember loving just because of the classical music being involved. So honestly, for those of you who have kids and want them to sort of have this sort of thing, I think it would take the time to try and locate some of this. Either at least find it online, or maybe track down an old VHS player that you have and try and buy some old tapes from eBay. Also, if the people out there who made Oscar's Orchestra can ever have a look at this thing, then please, can we at least get some... If it is available on DVD, I'd love to find out where I can get a hold of it. Because honestly, this show actually is... It's not a massive part of my childhood, but it is in there. And much like classical music itself, you don't remember how amazing it is until you revisit it. So with that being in mind, I'd like people out there in my little Randomfish net, if those of you who are watching this one can actually tell me, are there any shows that you remember watching from way back when that maybe you can't find that much anymore? Or maybe there's that one show that you just remember that you're not quite sure if you dreamt it or not because of how amazing it was. But maybe that's just me. But anyway, go and find Oscar's Orchestra. There's at least 2 episodes available on YouTube at the very least. You can also watch other various things of it. But hey, enjoy the show. Randomfish Out.